Okay, on today's show, releases could soon be blocked, drivers are raising the virtual middle finger, and another 14 of these very important places will be shutting their doors forever, causing a massive pain in the bum for a lot of people. Let's begin. The article says that more than 600 of the worst offenders could be blocked from release every year, in plans to be revealed this week. The new Victims and Prisoners Bill will hand ministers powers to thwart cons' bid for freedom after decades behind bars. Every year, around 660 of our worst criminals make pleas for a life outside jail to the parole board, but boards will now have to prioritise public safety over prisoner rights, ending the status quo that says it needs to be a balancing act. Rapists, murderers, terrorists and child abusers will find it much harder to gain their freedom, with the Justice Secretary also handed a veto to automatically block any release for the worst offenders. An insider said that people want to know the most dangerous offenders will be locked up until they no longer pose a threat, but too many recent cases undermined public confidence that the system actually works. Our changes will keep people safe by strengthening the release test so it is entirely about public protection, not prisoners' rights, and giving the ministers the final say in the most serious cases. The rules would have stopped Andrew Barlow, who is 66, who was jailed for the 13 rapes in Manchester in the 1980s and dubbed the Coronation Street Rapist, from being released. Well, finally, after what seems like about 325 million years, the government is actually listening to the people and putting our interests first, rather than the prisoners' human rights. Although, of course, whether this bill actually goes through Parliament is entirely another matter altogether, isn't it? Because unfortunately there are some people out there who, let's face it, unfortunately don't put public safety as high a priority as what they should do. Which, of course, not only is it a massive kick in the balls for the public in general, but also the victims. I mean, if someone has committed a horrible crime against you and gets a jail sentence, you expect them, quite rightly, to be in prison for that whole time, don't you? Not get released halfway through. And yes, whilst of course that doesn't happen in all cases, because let's face it, from what I've heard, it is on a case-by-case basis whether a prisoner gets parole or not. Surely you would have thought that for certain crimes, prisoners would not be entitled to parole instead of the whole case-by-case system. That seems to be happening, but either way, it just sort of makes a mockery of the whole system altogether, doesn't it? Because if you say to someone, you've got to be in prison for 10 years, but let's face it, you only need to serve 5, and out of that 5, near to the end of it, you can go on day release or weekend release or something like that. That's hardly a deterrent at all, is it? Compared to actually being locked up all of those 10 years. And yes, I know people are going to say, well, we haven't got enough prisons, you stupid boy. So to them I'd say, well, the government need to build more prisons, doesn't it? It's not rocket science. And yes, it will cost money, but that is more important than, I don't know, building a motorway, for example. Because if criminals in general had more of a deterrent, then surely they wouldn't commit those crimes in the first place, would they? The article says that drivers opposed to Sadiq Khan, or Sad IQ Khan as I like to call him, Ulez expansion have started covering up enforcement cameras with bags and boxes in protest. A total of 2,570 automatic number plate recognition cameras are planned to be installed to monitor the controversial Ulez ultra-low emission zone, which is due to expand to most of Greater London on August the 29th. And unfortunately, more than 300 have already been set up in the capital's outer boroughs. Pictures on social media, though, now show that some of them have unfortunately been covered up. What a shame, eh? One showed a box with the words, "Stop electing idiots," written on it. Very good advice there. Another camera appeared to have been covered up with a Sainsbury's bag for life. Mr Khan, London's mayor, has faced fierce opposition to the expansion scheme, which charges drivers some types of older, more polluting vehicles £12.50 a day to drive in London. Most petrol vehicles less than 16-year-old and diesel vehicles under 6-year-old meet these standards. Analysis recently carried out by the RAC revealed that up to 700,000 motorists could be liable for the £12.50 charge when the scheme is expanded. Transport for London and the Mayor's office, though, have contested that figure, saying that only 1 in 10 cars being driven in Outer London donor area, which is set to come under the scheme, will have to pay the levy. A spokesperson for Transport for London, the TfL, previously said that it removes any obstructions from cameras as part of its regular maintenance. It comes after pictures emerged of a Ulez camera close to Heathrow with its wires cut in Uxbridge. Another 4 cameras in Abbey Wood, Greenwich, were also shown to have been vandalised earlier this month. Whilst, of course, in general, I do not support any sort of vandalism at all, because let's face it, if I did, that would surely put me on the side of all these eco-idiots everywhere trying to destroy our statues and vandalise paintings or whatever else. So, while vandalism is a bad thing and shouldn't obviously be done, the government does need to realise that this whole Ulez thing is actually taking a pee a bit, isn't it? I could have understood in central London where there is quite a bit of traffic from what I've heard, but for the out-of-boroughs of London, it is going down the whole pee-taking route in general, isn't it? And will actually affect quite a lot of businesses, and some everyday people are bound to get caught out by this daily fee. No doubt, of course, they probably want us all to trade in our vehicles for some newer EVs, no doubt pushing the green agenda once again and trying to make the EV switch happen more sooner, I'm guessing. Maybe, who knows, before the 2030 deadline, when of course all petrol and diesel vehicles will no longer be sold, unless of course it is a hybrid. What they're not considering is this is going to affect the poorest the most, isn't it? Because if you've got a car that is that old, or van or whatever, then surely it means you can't actually afford to buy a new one, doesn't it? I mean, haven't they worked that out? I know the mayor is obviously Labour, and therefore obviously might not be the full ticket. I mean, who knows? But even so, you would have thought he would have thought of that. Or maybe he doesn't actually care and just thinking about the mountain of cash that this will probably bring in for his office and, of course, the Transport for London. And therefore, it seems like nothing but a cash grab to me, because, let's face it, when the switch to electric does eventually happen, which obviously as more and more people buy these vehicles, it will do. Let's say, for example, in 10-15 years' time, if that is the case, then surely all these new Ulez cameras that they're now only putting up are just going to be made redundant, aren't they? Which is no doubt, of course, a massive waste of taxpayer cash in general, isn't it? If they're only going to last that long, and yes, I know there's obviously going to be a few petrol or diesel vehicles around by then, but a lot of people would have made the switch, I'm guessing. But this whole thing is a bit strange altogether, isn't it, really? Because let's face it, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, or whatever, when surely those vehicles don't meet today's modern day safety standards, there wasn't all this fuss back then, was there? So why now? Unless, of course, it is a cash grab. And just makes me wonder that when, of course, EVs are the main sort of transport, and therefore there is no harmless fumes, what's going to come out next? Are they going to penalise you for the type of battery you've got? Maybe, who knows, a pay-as-you-drive charge. I'm guessing that'll probably happen. The article says that a major high street bank has announced that it is set to shut more than a dozen branches this year in its latest round of closures. Barclays is to shut its doors on another 14 locations across the country. The bank is set to close branches in England and Wales, with sites in Cambridge and Holmes Chapel among those affected. All of the branches are set to close their doors in June. Barclays has already announced a number of closures earlier this year. Data from Link, the UK's largest cash machine network, shows when the banks are set to close over the next 5 months. Barclays has announced a total of 68 branch closures this year, and in this month alone, 11 Barclays branches have closed. April will see another 22 shut their doors for the last time, with 7 more to follow in May. This takes the total number of branches closing in June alone to 28. Barclays has previously said that more customers are now choosing to do their banking online and on apps rather than visiting in person. In total, a whopping 316 bank branches across England, Scotland and Wales are to close or have already closed this year. A further 8 have been marked for closure, with no official date confirmed. NatWest, though, closed 9 branches this month, with 6 more to come in April. Santander closed 3 branches in March, and Halifax closed 1. Well, of course, not only is this a massive kick in the gonads for OAPs, because let's face it, most of them don't really know how to use apps, do they? It is, in general, I'm guessing, another move to a cashless society, because if you can't put in cash, then surely that's going to entice more and more people to actually go cashless. Especially, as of course, because it will make it harder for businesses to deposit their takings at the end of the day. So, therefore, they may choose to eliminate cash as a form of payment altogether, which admittedly does have its upsides in, of course, not either having cash on the buildings, so it eliminates robbins from the till, but also, unfortunately, stops people paying by cash if they so choose. And we did see that happen quite a bit in the pandemic, didn't we? Because companies like Pizza Hut, from what I remember, stopped taking cash as a form of payment altogether and made people actually order through apps rather than talk to a waiter or waitress. And yes, of course, admittedly, whilst I do understand that if something isn't being used, then businesses are going to want to cancel it completely because they obviously have to pay staff and whatever else to keep the place afloat, which doesn't make particularly great business sense, you would have thought that they would have dedicated people to to try and help the older generation use their apps, and offered something like a mobile banking van or something like that, which turns up at least once or twice a week for the people who generally do need it. And of course, by closing all these banks, it's bound to lead to a load more redundancies, isn't it? Which, let's face it, isn't the thing people really need in the cost of living crisis, is it? So thanks a lot, Barclays and all the other banks out there. You could have delayed this a bit, couldn't you? But of course, it's not just banks, is it? Because in this video, it seems like an apparently big MOT change might soon be costing us all a lot more. Anyway, subscribe for more and I'll see you in the next one.